asking people in the street, what's your worst? Yeah, one of them is, what's your worst fear? And so you get it like with a simultaneous translation. And some guy in Tokyo and some guy in Brazil and some guy in Moscow, and it's going by really, really quickly.
What's your worst fear?
Just as a repeated, kind of a repeated motif.
Huh. So is it like every week, or is it like?
I think it probably runs a couple. They probably run it over and over. I don't know how often the new ones pop out, but given the way I can't get MTV up here, so I don't really know how I don't see it enough to know how they operate. But I have the feeling that they rerun.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, sure.
So where does the money come from? Is it English money?
No, it's MTV money. And the main guys are MTV, the main producers are big MTV guys. But they hired these young Brits to kind of coordinate the continental end of it.
So it's like Max Headroom 2?
It's like something Max Headroom would have been, when people would have been watching the Max Headroom. But I know that British people are dissatisfied with the stuff they're getting from the American freelancers who go around and pick it up. So.
Yeah. Huh. I gotta say it does. It's new, right? It's a new show.
Yeah, it's been. I think the first one they had the first one done in January. I think it took a couple of months before they actually aired it over here.
And where did they produce it? Out of New York?
Yeah, but I think a lot of the editing and stuff's done in London.
Oh.
This guy Mark Neal seems to have a lot to do with it.
Huh. Television, I'll tell you. So let's see. Well, here we are. Well, look, thanks a lot, by the way.
Yeah.
Let's see. Let's see. Heavy schedule here. Let's couple questions. Let's start. What do you think of Japan?
Well, I used to think it was the future, and now I think it's the present, but I think it's still a little bit ahead of us. I think the future might turn out to be Singapore or maybe Leningrad, something that we're not quite ready for. But like a decade ago, I decided that the Japanese were sort of living in the 21st century, or I thought it would feel that way. And when I went there, it wasn't quite, I wrote about an imaginary Japan before I went, which in some ways is the best way to do it. When I went and compared what I had done with what was happening, parts matched and parts were just sort of business as usual, aside from the fact that it was happening in a different cultural context. But it's a fascinating place. I think it's certainly a place that no one can avoid these days. I mean, every consumer durable I own that anyone would want to steal is Japanese, and that's been the case for many years now.
So when you went over there, so you wrote about it first and then you went over there?
Yeah.
Did you have a good time when you went?
I liked it, but it was sort of like getting the Cook's tour. I never saw. Somehow I felt that I didn't. There were things that I didn't. I knew there were things that I didn't see. I saw what my hosts wanted me to see. Relentlessly, too. I think we had 2 hours of. In a 10-day trip, we had 2 hours of free time, and they very carefully announced that this is unscheduled. The rest of it was, was just like minute by minute. Things were happening. I like the feeling of being. I like the feeling of being a North American in a country where you're poor. I mean, it's kind of a good reversal on the way things have been. And several older Japanese people, total strangers, came up to me on the street and in the airport and apologized for the currency exchange rates. Said they thought it was a shame, and they felt ashamed that my money was worthless. I said, "Don't worry, Don't worry, we've been doing this to other people for years.
Huh. My aunt's Japanese, and my uncle, they live in Tokyo.
Yeah.
Keiko Yamamoto Fitzgerald is her name.
Great, good names.
And I was there once a number of years ago, like 10 years ago, and like hitchhiked around the big island.
Yeah.
And that was pretty amazing. Actually, spent a lot of time in Tokyo and I hitchhiked. Did you get outside of Tokyo?
Just to a place called Kamakura, which is like a beach resort. So we got sort of glimpses of. I couldn't really say it was the country, but it was not the city. Sort of the in between, intra-urban area. And there would occasionally be like, a vacant lot or a field or something, in some sense of what the original landscape was. But Tokyo just seemed like one big thing with more electric lights than Los Angeles. That was impressive. How many light bulbs those guys can afford to burn on a given night.
It's a lot. It's like Las Vegas.
Yeah, they have. Except I think the Japanese have more colors of neon. They have a broader neon spectrum than any other place in the world.
That could be. So did you eat anything over there?
Everything, yeah. Everything that was put before us, including the live fish, which was a little tough on my wife. I said, "Do you like live fish?" And we thought they meant fresh fish. And we said, "Oh yes, as fresh as possible." And this poor thing arrived on a plate that was still moving. It had been expertly sushi'd, on the hoof, as it were. That one was a bit tough. But I love Japanese food anyway. I could just eat it all the time.
What I liked was there was an eel restaurant in Shinjuku that was really great, where you walk in and all the eels are, swimming around. And when they call the order,
big eel fan.
Yeah, well, and they call the orders in. You can sit down and order. They call the orders, and the guy yells back, and he reaches in the tank and grabs like an eel out, cuts it up, and cooks it. Very good.
Yeah, some of those the Shinjuku places. Did you go to Golden Street?
No.
That's an amazing sort of like a block of very small bars, but these are bars that are so small they have like 4 stools, but each one is, they're not freestanding, but each one is a separate structure. And it's one of those places where people have their bottle of whiskey with their name. You go in and buy a bottle and they put your name on it and leave it up on the shelf. So in a way it becomes sort of a de facto private club, like you can't drink there unless you've got your own stash. And that was pretty amazing. It was very Terry and the Pirates kind of. It was the only place I saw there that was faintly sinister, because otherwise it's such an incredibly safe city. They're really, really very law-abiding sort of town. But some of the racier part of Shinjuku had an interesting feel. It did feel a little bit like some of the stuff in my books.
So, but you wrote about it after you went there too, right?
Yeah, well, the third book in that series was written after I went there, but I didn't really take much advantage of it because I didn't want to violate the material in the first 2 books. So in the third book you just get the glimpses of the city are a little bit more detailed, and there's specific little minor landmarks mentioned, but you don't get to see much of it. You get to see a lot of London in the 21st century, way more than Tokyo. So I figured that the Japanese stuff worked better if it was sort of off stage. And the Japanese seemed to like it. So, I've never felt guilty about making it up because the books are really popular there. And as far as I could tell, the response is sort of, yeah, you got it. We're not really like that, but that's cool. They like that. They like that version of it.
That's good. So what do you think if Japan isn't the 21st century, or?
Well, I'm a very intuitive guy. It doesn't, I just sort of play this stuff off the cuff, but I think it's possible that Japan may have peaked, or it may be in the process of peaking. Whatever we've been whatever we've watched happen since. Well, not really since the end of not since the war, since the Industrial Revolution. Because I think the thing that makes them, one of the things that makes them a really fascinating country is they consciously imported the whole Industrial Revolution. They bought it essentially they bought it from England in a kit. And they said, give us, we want railroad, telegraph, steam engines, battleships, cannons, give it, in here, here's the check, ship it all in. And they sort of got it, unpacked it, and set it up, and changed everything overnight, but managed to absorb it in some remarkable way. I don't think they ever had the sort of trauma that Europe did with that. And we can't even feel the original trauma of industrialization now. It's happened to us. But if you look at, historical, go back to first-hand sources, people were, having amazing experiences, like in the 1860s. But, if you didn't know what a railroad was, and some surveyors came through, built one, well, you're faced with it's like the guy comes in and says, hey, we've got a machine that abolishes time and distance, and we're going to put one right here. And people scratch their heads, and sure enough, it would be there. And London, would be like an hour away, which for some guy who was used to walking or riding a horse must have been just an astonishing change. But I think the Japanese coped with that in some very elegant way and sort of absorbed it. And I've always been very impressed by that.
Yeah, it's a. So then you have it surrounded by everybody else now, right? Korea.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I think one of my strangest things the strangest moment in Japan was that one of the guys who'd been taking me around sort of on the last night, and we'd gone out for a drink, and we were standing in one of the big squares with sort of giant Blade Runner style video displays and things, and we were sort of looking up at all this stuff, and he sort of clapped his arm around my shoulder and said, now you'll understand, we're not Asian, we're Western people, And I said, yeah, Rookie, like, I don't think they identify with I think now they don't identify with the cultures that surround them as much as they identify with us or with elements of our culture or European culture.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a kind of mysterious thing. I went to one very trendy restaurant, which is probably gone now, a theme restaurant where the theme, as far as I could tell, was of an imaginary third world Asian country. And in English, it said on the menu, it said cuisine of no country. And then it was this, the walls were raw concrete with sort of straw pressed into them. And there was a lot of unfinished steel, and it was extremely elegant and postmodern, but at the same time it evoked some weird kind of peasant thing, like a fantasy of Cambodia. And the waitresses were wearing mini skirts made out of, as far as I could tell, hand-woven Guatemalan material. Like there was a lot of South American stuff around, but stuff from different countries. And it looked, to give you the sense of being in a foreign place, but it was an imaginary foreign place. And it was decidedly Asian in its tone, and it was very chic, it was a very hot place that week. And I thought, that's really wild. I don't know what that says about anything, but that was one of my favorite things I saw when I was there in terms of design and marketing.
So what did they serve?
Not very good stuff. Some kind of bad, kind of greasy sausages and weird canapes. I didn't have the actual menu. Somebody was having a party for us there, so we sort of had the canape trays and things. But it was just wonderfully weird environment. It was also on the outside, the building was designed to look as though it had been wrecked in an earthquake. It had a big crack down one side with exposed links of rusting rebar, and then a real Tokyo streetlight, which I assume they bought from the city. And they set up in the sidewalk and then pushed over it so that the streetlight hung in through the opening in the wall and looked as though it had collapsed, but it was in fact part of the restaurant. But when you walked down the street, there was this thing into it. It was sort of cracked open. I can't remember what it was called. Something that meant nothing, I think, just like a nonsense syllable in English. It wasn't I said, "Is that a Japanese word?" And they said, "No." I said, "What's it mean?" And they said, "Nothing." Just like the names for Japanese cars that have been generated by computers, so they won't mean anything offensive in any given language, but they mean like nothing. I love that kind of, that's a hell of a job. Actually, there's a guy there's a minor character in Mona Lisa Overdrive whose job is to invent names that can be trademarked that don't mean anything and won't offend anyone, no matter where you sell it. So.
And they have to sound good, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, they have to sound good.
Yeah, apparently forget where it is that you couldn't sell the Volkswagen. Volkswagen Rabbit had to be called something else because in some cultures Rabbit has really negative connotations of sort of cowardice and fear. It's just not a thing you'd want to name it. It's like a new Chevy Hamster. It just wouldn't sell.
I can see that. I've wondered about Rabbit myself a couple of times. So what are we doing these days? We're writing books and writing screenplays and stuff?
Yeah, well, we're waiting on screenplays to be made and waiting for books to be published. I actually am kind of between. What I'm doing now is I'm on the phone a lot. I'm mostly with people in Hollywood, but I've got a book that's coming out in England in September that I wrote with my friend Bruce Sterling. He's a Texas-based science fiction writer. I've known for years. And I've got, that'll be out the Bantam edition will be out in early '91 in the States. And I've got a lot of screenplays sitting in Hollywood in various stages of disarray, or as they call it, pre-production. Development, that's what development. So things are in development, but once I've written them and they're out there, I just sort of leave them alone. Look occasionally to see if there's any mold growing on them, or what's happened to the thing.
So do you want to make movies?
It would be I would love to see them make one, just to see what happens. But so the job of being a screenwriter in Hollywood is sort of like, compared to being a novelist, it's a bit like being a plumber. Because when you're writing a novel, nobody can walk in and fire you and replace you with a team of 600 guys. But when you're writing a screenplay, they can, and it happens frequently enough. I've actually seen situations in Hollywood where there were 15 people simultaneously rewriting or writing a movie that was already in pre-production. That in fact was shooting, and they'd have like 2 floors on an office building on Sunset. These guys in there with their mechs and fighting about how it was going to, that end of it, I hope I never get too involved with. But in terms of just going in and writing a 120-page idea for somebody and being very well paid for it, that's great. But until they actually make one, I'm not going to know what it feels like. So.
Yeah, that's one of the things that some people I know who have been writing screenplays for a while. It's like they've written a number of them, they've worked on so many of them, rewriting other people's stuff. And they've actually made money, and, pretty good money in their life.
Yeah, you make really
but
good money.
Haven't seen a fucking movie, out of the stuff.
Yeah, and apparently that's not held against you, at least not for many, many years. And then once you get something made, that's even, your stock goes up. Unless, I suppose, it's like a howling turkey. But I suspect even then that if, having had something produced sort of adds to your cachet a bit. But
Well, you could always blame it on somebody, like there was a bad director.
Yeah.
They shouldn't have cast that guy anyway.
Yeah, but it's a totally collaborative process, and it's completely different from writing novels. I mean, when I do novels, I have artistic control. I have the control that even powerful directors can only dream of, because I can do everything. And then, there's nobody I can blame it on if it's bad. And if it's good, I can take all the credit. And that's much more, in some ways, much more appealing. It doesn't pay the bills quite as steadily, but it's, it's still what I prefer to do.
So how, it's got to be a good time now for somebody to make a movie about, from a screenplay of yours, right? Yeah,
but it's a slow process. I mean, I have the feeling I have from watching stuff in Hollywood is that the average gestation period for a movie that's not, Days of Thunder or something, it's like maybe 4 years. It takes a long time for the thing to fall together, and there's so many possible slips. So it's, if everything went optimally well, it's possible that you could see some kind of vaguely Gibson-based movie in 2 years. But before then, I don't know, I think it would take some sort of miracle.
Yeah.
So, it grinds slowly on. Actually, the one that I'm involved in that might actually come out first is a Soviet production, just because they've got a different system. I don't know if anyone over here would ever see it, but I've been talking with a young Soviet director who wants to do a science fiction movie in Leningrad, and in that weird, ironic, sort of early 90s way, this guy has so much more freedom than anybody in the American system, provided he can get some dollars to put on top of the rubles he's already got. He can do whatever he wants to. He's got total artistic control. The state's not going to mess with him, and there's nobody else. I find that very funny. It's kind of an appealing idea.
That's amazing.
And you can dial direct now, so it's like, for somebody my age, that's really amazing. I mean, I'm easily go into techno shock really much more easily than people would imagine I do. But just getting up this morning and dialing direct to Kazakhstan and Central Asia and getting through on a relatively clear line as easily as a better line than I had to London half an hour later. It just makes me kind of go, wow, I just called and I'm talking to the Soviet Union and probably nobody's even listening. Nobody, it's like nobody cares. It's a weird delight out of that. I think, my father wouldn't have believed this in 1952. I mean, the telephone still looks basically the same, except it's got push buttons on it. But I think the idea that you could just sit down and do that and get somebody in some, sort of a Genghis Khan country. Although it's easier to call there than it is to call Leningrad or Moscow. Because their lines are all jammed and screwed up, apparently. It's hard to get in, but you can call like these out, the sticks really easily. Way more, much better connection than you get to Mexico City. So that kind of just simple little the facts of everyday technology kind of blow me away sometimes. I think maybe that's why I write the stuff I do, to kind of exorcise that kind of sense of mild future shock that I think most of us have, or anyway, most of us over 12 probably have.
So when you were growing up, you never considered yourself any sort of a tech or any sort of a...
Well, I was a really keen science fiction fan from about age 12 to 15, which is maybe in some way used to be the optimal age for being a keen science fiction fan. The science fiction publishers, I think, now suspect that the demographic of the readership is shifting, and it's shifting in a way that sort of worries them, because the people who are reading printed science fiction now are the same bunch of individuals who were reading it 10 years ago, and the audience, the publishers believed for a long time that the audience replaced itself, that kids would read this stuff and then be replaced by another group of kids and another group of kids, which is why people like Heinlein and Asimov can have novels that have gone through 50 editions. And it would just, the publishers used to just put it out for the new audience that was coming along. But some of the recent surveys suggest that the SF audience is aging, and that it's not really replacing it. It's not replacing itself. So it'll be interesting to see if that's true.
So that means it's going to die out if it doesn't replace itself?
It's a possibility. Yeah, it's a possibility. If you don't, if it's locked into the sort of the baby boomers, or the generation after that, and it doesn't get the kids who are coming out now. And my sense, it's hard to tell who your audience is when you're a writer. It's really, you get some letters and you meet some people when you do book signings. But that's a special, the people who would bother to write are kind of a special case, and the people who bother to come and meet you are kind of a special case. So I don't really know who reads my books, and I don't have any overall sense of what the real audience is. But they don't strike me as being that young. I would have expected kind of more 15-year-olds, And they may be reading me, but I don't. Maybe they just, maybe I just don't hear from them. But I get a lot of people in their 30s, and fortunately, I get people who are younger than I am. But so otherwise, I think I would be in trouble. But not that much younger, It's people, it's sort of adults. So
How old are you?
42.
Interesting age.
Which is very old for a science fiction writer who's only published 3 or 4 books. There's a tradition, at least in American science fiction, is that the sort of the writers are prodigies, and people publish first novels at 19. Oh, this is what my partner Bruce Sterling did. I think he wasn't 20 when he brought out his first book, but he's a younger guy. So.
What was Dick when he published his first stuff? He was pretty young too, wasn't
he? Yeah, I'm not sure. I think he might have been in his 20s, but there have been plenty of cases of like 17-year-olds. I think Robert Silverberg was making a very, very good living by the time he was in his early 20s. I think he was going to college in New York and making more than any of his teachers, and he was just churning out stuff for the science fiction magazines. And I missed all that because I didn't start writing until I was in my early 30s, which is kind of late. Somehow in the science fiction scene, it's kind of late. Like people usually start earlier. I'm glad I waited though, because it gave me something to write about, rather than just a bunch of made-up spaceships and stuff.
So did you write other things before that?
No, I didn't. I went right into it, and I felt a little dubious and embarrassed about doing it. Actually, when I thought, well, I could write some science fiction, and I thought, oh, what a juvenile, dorky thing for a grown man to do. I really felt a little bit. It was a little a little peculiar, you know. It's like going back and playing with spaceships and stuff. So, but it surprised me, you know. You know, I'm glad I did it, but it, you know, I viewed the initial impulse with some trepidation. But, you know, people will laugh.
So you mean you just one day decided to write a science fiction book?
No, I did short stories. Actually, how I started, I was taking a course in college from a friend of mine who was teaching. She was teaching a science fiction course, and I was taking it as sort of like a gut course. So I thought, well, I've read all these books anyway. And at that time, I was working on an animated film and an animation course, and I wanted to spend all my time doing that. So I said, I'll take this SF course, and I won't attend the lectures. And I've already read the books, and I'll just slop through. And so I tried it that way, and then I went to her and said, "Listen, give me a break. I really, you know, I don't have time to write a term paper for this. You know, just, you know, give me a pass." And she said, "Well, if you can't write a term paper, you have to write a story." I said, "Oh, okay." So I went home, and I think it took like 3 months to write this 12-page little story that I gave her, and she said, "Oh, that's okay, you should try to sell that." So I sent it somewhere, and I think I sold it for like $23 to this little pathetic little magazine that nobody ever saw. Not like an amateur magazine from Boston. And so, you know, I was really happy when I sold it, but then I sort of, you know, the cars from the Pulitzer Prize didn't appear outside the door, and I got all, you know, less than $24, and nobody ever read it. So I just sort of let it, you know, said, "Oh no, writing's not for me." But about a year later, I did another one, which I sold, and then I started selling them to Omni, and Omni paid enough that at that point I couldn't actually stop. Like I'd get like $1,500 or something for a story, and it was the most money I knew how to get at one time, at that time. So I just kept doing it. And I didn't think I was going to do a book. I thought I would eventually do a novel, but I thought I was like 6 years away from it. And a guy commissioned me to do Neuromancer, a man named Terry Card, who had a series going where he went around and hired people to do first novels. And he was like a talent scout. And he had done this once before in the 60s, and it turned up a lot of people who became quite well-established science fiction writers. I think Ursula Le Guin started with Terry's first series of these books. And so he said, "Here, you know, I'll give you some money to start, and you write me a novel, and if it's any good, I'll give you some more money when you give it to me." And it's, you know, come back a year later. So I think I was like 6 months overdue on it, which is something I've sort of become famous for. I think I'm a little more overdue each time as the books get bigger and more complicated. But they published it, and I didn't expect anything. I expected it just to vanish, really. In some ways, I deliberately constructed it, I thought, to piss off the traditional science fiction audience. Because I think when I first went into it, I thought, okay, I'll try to write something that'll make them happy. And that made me really unhappy, so I decided I'd write something that was just, you know, what I liked, you know, which at that point I had never ever really seen anywhere. So I wrote Neuromancer, and they published it, and then suddenly it won every prize pretty well every prize that it could win in its year. And you know, and I was completely flabbergasted, and we never got the kind of reactionary art shock and outrage that I was sort of hoping for. And it's like the more traditional people just said, "Oh yeah, that's science fiction." You know, the established writers said, "Yeah, that's science fiction. Gives that boy a prize." So I said, "Okay, I'll do some more." In fact, I only recently got the reactionary art shock outrage, and I had to be in an architecture show in San Francisco to get it. but I did there's a show at the museum, San Francisco Museum of Modern Art now called Visionary San Francisco, and the man who curated it commissioned a couple of writers to write pieces about San Francisco, which were then given to teams of architects who constructed models and vaguely related architectural things. And just last week I got a hold of the Chronicle Architecture Critics review of the show, and it was really finally the response that I was expecting from Neuromancer. He said that things like this had no place in a self-respecting museum of art. It was, I thought, finally, you know, I got it. I made somebody angry. Because when I started, I thought, I didn't think what I was doing was particularly avant-garde, but I thought that science fiction per se had become so conservative that the Neuromancer would either be ignored or held up for special scorn. And I was sort of waiting for the special scorn, and they sort of brought me all these presents and offered me, said, take these prizes and write more books. And generally, the response has been generally pretty good, and it sort of leaves me kind of baffled, because all my, I guess my real heroes in literature are all outlaws of one kind or another, which is not unusual for a guy my age. But I sort of grew up on William Burroughs and Pynchon and Kerouac and all those people who, may now be seen as very important, but when they initially published, they were just pretty widely dismissed as being crazy and worthless and sub-art. Quiet dog. Harmless. Hey, Sarah.
Guard dog. Sarah, you're so small, so cute, and so loud.
That's all she can do is bark and growl.
What was that? Pardon me?
All she can do is bark and growl. Calm down, dear.
So what do you think about this? Let's see. You were born in 1948, right?
Yeah.
It was a great year for being born.
Yeah, I can remember when there weren't any television sets, at least not in my neck of the woods. I remember when television sets were big things made out of wood that had screens the size of, little saucers, which seems very strange now, in the almost world of virtual reality, to remember those big wooden television sets. Most kids today don't know what vacuum tubes are. That's when's the last time you saw one? If you show a little kid a vacuum tube, they don't even know it's electronic. What is it?
So there's been a lot of changes over
Yeah.
let's say since 1948 or since 1958 or 68 or 78 or even 88 at this point.
Yeah, well that's sort of my, those changes are putting food in my mouth, that's like my stock and trade, how people have responded to those changes. I think that more than how things might change, I'm not real interested in the predictive capacity of science fiction, because it tends to be way off base. And for me, the thing that science fiction does that may have some redeeming social value is I think it sort of smooths the humps out for people. It gives you a framework in which you can examine what's already happened, what's happened in your lifetime.
So, what do you think about the speed at which things have, moved, accelerated over that? Things used to be slow, and now they're faster and faster. And the changes are so fast now. Changes in computers, for example, changes in anything. You start writing a book about computers tomorrow, and by the time it gets published next year, nobody would read it, probably.
Yeah, that's true. I don't know. I don't think I do think I'm aware of it, but I don't think I think of it. I think of it with some sort of my response to it is somewhere between a kind of silent cellular scream and a giggle. It's just there. I think that's not only what's happening, that's what we are somehow. I think that's what we've become. I think we started to become whatever we now are about 130 years ago. And more and more I see it, this is the Industrial Revolution. What's happening to you is industrial civilization. It's not some new thing that started after the Second World War. It goes back a ways, and it's been fairly constant. There've been lulls, periods when it sort of levels out, but I think it's sort of a constant arc. And I have no real idea of where it's going. Some of the real technological supposition that's come up since I wrote Neuromancer, I can't imagine where, so some of this stuff is just unimaginable. Nanotechnology and the idea that you can live forever by injecting subatomic artificial organisms into your body, which will go around and repair your DNA and clean everything up. And these are literally like little machines. They're floating around. There are people taking that. Eric Drexler takes that very seriously indeed. That's what he's all about. But in terms of me writing a science fiction about it, I just sort of think I give up. I've reached. I think I got to my limit in that direction with the cyberspace idea, which I think is sort of the only original, maybe the only really original thing I came up with in those books. And it's now being, there are people now trying to interpret that as get that workable and into your living room.
So what do you think about virtual reality? I mean, as a
well, it's not cyberspace in the sense that I initially dreamed that up. It's so, well, this is an oversimplification, but it's more like television. What they're talking about would be like the ability to enter the screen, get in there and manipulate things, and it's like interactive television. And I think as long as the stuff's being fed to you by two tiny little television projectors in front of your eyes, it is a sort of television. What I had in mind, and this is always very hard for me to describe, and I sure managed to gloss over it a lot, frequently in those books. What I had in mind was a sort of global architecture of information. And I imagine a territory. It's not really a space. It doesn't occupy any physical space, but a global territory where everything anyone had stored on a computer would be visible in some symbolic form, so that the user of the system could enter this apparent place and very quickly access the material, or else, as I think would be more likely, sort of run up against a wall that says, "Keep off, this belongs to AT&T." Or, "This is where we keep our stuff. You stay away, you keep your stuff over there." And I think we're a very long way from that. It would require I don't know, on, Sarah. You're messing up my visionary statement. Somebody comes up the stairs, she'll explode totally. The recent Secret Service busts in the States, seizing the computers at Steve Jackson Games and various hackers being picked up. I think that might be the beginning of cyberspace, because legally that territory will start to be defined now in the court cases that come out of those arrests. And so there'll be more arrests and there'll be more court cases, and we'll wind up with what sort of law of real estate for this territory that's not really a place, but it is a territory. It's the territory in which a long-distance telephone conversation takes place. That's not really happening anywhere in particular, but it's happening. And I think that's going to be, or another place that I can see it emerging from would be the kind of digital audio sampling technology, and the court cases that are going to come out of people borrowing, rap groups borrowing bits of other people's digital material. I mean, all of that stuff exists. All those little bites of Sly Stone and whoever exist in some computer somewhere. They're in cyberspace. They're removed from cyberspace and assembled by rap technicians and put out as product. So when you start, and the court cases surrounding a lot of that stuff are very strange and almost platonic. They're striving for definitions of territory. And I think out of those definitions of territory, some sort of map will be born. Because right now, a lot of this stuff is terra incognita. They know when if you can say, okay, I invaded NASA's computer space. But, that's just, NASA's computer space is just a tiny little outpost on a big blank map, where there's really quite a lot of stuff going on. It just hasn't been mapped yet.
The rules haven't been put in place about how it should.
Well, I think it's even stranger than that. It's not so much a matter. It's not the rules so much as a definition of the territory. They're going to have to. At some point, somebody's going to have to say what this stuff is and where it exists and how it differs from physical territory. And I just have the intuitive hunch that underlay all the gimmickry in my first three novels was that it was territory, and that it would eventually have to be treated as such. But when I did those. When I wrote those books, I never bothered with trying to work out how they arrived at this other world. And I think that's what, in a way, that's what the virtual reality people are doing. That's what some of them are thinking about anyway. There was a cyberspace conference at UT Austin a couple of months ago, and it was sponsored by the architecture department. And the architects were thinking about it. They were thinking of what the overall architecture of cyberspace would be. And I found that kind of interesting. Although it could as easily be the lawyers.
Yeah, so who do you think is going to define the territory?
Well, I think that it's going to, I would imagine that it would emerge from conflict of some sort. Not from warfare so much as from people bumping into one another and violating one another's sense of territory. And then out of that will come a need to define who goes where, what is what property is in that context. Because if you've got a space that's not a space, and there are things in it that aren't things, who do they belong to? It's like once you have to, I think the sort of leap of faith that people, or probably the willing suspension of disbelief, or whatever you want to call it, that you have to make with those first three novels of mine, is that the information in a computer, even if it's stored in the mainframe, doesn't exist there solely. That it has some mysterious sort of relationship to every other piece of stored data everywhere. And as we're starting to see, that stuff can be gotten at. You know, there's some of these very bright kids who know how to get from one corner of the chessboard to the other. Although the two computers may be thousands of miles apart and programmed in different languages. Right? I think that, if there ever is going to be a cyberspace in anything like the sense I've described it, it's going to have to evolve out of use of the territory. I think cyberspace now is like Texas in 1810. It's just like there's some madmen and there's some heavily armed contingents of people with big money. And it's going to have to be civilized. I just hope it's civilized in a way that's sufficiently liberal to appeal to me. Really though, I think if it's restrained, too much governmental control on this stuff, and it's not going to happen anyway. Because whatever we're seeing with the growth of this phenomena has a lot to do with having the freedom to do it. I'm not sure what the current status of the law is in Great Britain on computer bulletin boards, but I don't think they have them in quite the sense that we have them. I don't think you can just establish one. Given the British history of problems with pirate radio and attempts at virtual state monopoly on various communications medium, the British, like the French, the British introduced a system that's something like the French Minitel system, where rather than having a PC, you call up the post office and they bring this little thing in and hook it to your telephone, and you can talk to other people on it. And so maybe it generates a certain amount of money for the state, but it keeps people from developing all these strange, wacky alternative systems that we have in North America. And this, I think all the people I've met from the computer business, from the top end of it, seem very much aware that the whole PC phenomena, Apple and all of that, emerged from exactly that same crazy mix of people messing around. So, I hope that cyberspace won't be chopped up into shopping malls. Although apparently, so I didn't go to that conference in Austin, but apparently there was one man there talking about his idea for cyberspace was to present it as a shopping mall, basically. He said it would be user-friendly. You'd kind of go in, it would have little info boutiques. You'd sort of go in and that would be your spatial sense of it, that you're in the mall. I don't know.
George Romero.
Yeah, we'll have to see. I'm going to have to run and do this call. I wish I could take more time.
Thanks a lot. That was terrific.